What's up, everyone, and welcome into episode number 479, where this will be the last episode before the college football season preview episodes start coming out. I just can't believe we finally reached college football. So, obviously, those episodes will be primarily about college football. I'll obviously talk a little bit about maybe Lions, depending on cuts. I also talk about Tigers as well. But this episode, because of that, is going to solely be focused on the Tigers and the Lions, especially the Lions' last preseason game. They had it yesterday. They end up losing against the Houston Texans 26-7. So obviously the result, not necessarily the greatest per se, but I think we figured out a little bit more about this team. I think we had a few pretty good standouts for the Lions, and absolutely we figured out who's going to be the backup quarterback, and that is going to be Kyle Allen. Kyle Allen was pretty great in his two drives in this game. He ended up obviously throwing a touchdown to Isaac Tesla, his third straight game scoring a touchdown. His touchdown celebration was absolutely fantastic as well. We got to see a worm. He didn't have a single incompletion throwing the ball. Kyle Allen did. And this was just really the game that, to me, kind of solidified Kyle Allen is going to be QB2. Now, he did say going into the game that I thought Kyle Allen absolutely was in front of Hendon Hooker quite a bit, but I think this game really shows you that Kyle Allen, while maybe not the most talented backup quarterback you'll ever see, he really truly understands this offense and is able to run this offense so much better than Hendon Hooker is. And it sucks because Hendon Hooker obviously was a pretty high draft pick. I believe he was a third-round draft pick. You saw kind of the potential that he had. Now, obviously, going into the NFL, he was a little bit older. He had some injuries, but you saw the arm talent that Hendon Hooker had, and this was just a game that, again, you really saw the Hendon Hooker we have seen the last couple of years when he's been able to play in the preseason. He threw one interception, just wasn't really able to get this offense going, and that's really the biggest difference between Hendon Hooker and Kyle Allen is Kyle Allen was able to move the offense down the field. He did make some mistakes, but when he made the mistakes, it was early. He also responded right from there, and even after his game against the Chargers in the Hall of Fame game, Kyle Allen was fantastic after that. He just was great in this game. Love seeing that. And absolutely, you love seeing Isaac Tesla just continue to ball out in the preseason. I believe he had like 13 targets, 10 receptions, 3 touchdowns. I think it was like 160 some odd yards for the preseason. He's someone that is going to absolutely be contributing to this team. And Dan Campbell even said that after the preseason game yesterday, is that he's going to be a guy that's going to probably be very impactful for this team. He's going to be a guy that's really going to be fighting for that wide receiver number 3 spot because obviously Amon-Ra St. Brown, J-Mo are going to have the 1 and 2. Tim Patrick hasn't played in the preseason, so obviously we haven't seen him. Now, I know he's been struggling. At least reports have been saying that he has been struggling overall, but Isaac has just been absolutely balling out. He has gotten his opportunities, and when he has, he's taken advantage of them. So you look at those two guys, they've performed extremely well. The other guys, especially that played pretty well on the defense, you have guys like Trevor Nowowski. He was a guy that was pretty important last year, especially because of all the injuries. He had 9 tackles yesterday, played multiple linebacker positions. He was all over the field. You also have Lauren Strickland, the safety, a really nice game from him as well. Those are kind of the 4 guys that, to me, really stood out to this team. There's a couple bubble guys that I thought probably should have gotten better games from. And you had like Jackson Meeks and Dominic Lovett. They were held without a catch in your last preseason game with a real opportunity to solidify a roster spot. Now, I do think at least one of those guys gets a roster spot. Maybe they both do. But with the wide receiver room as good as it is, with the Amon-Ra St. Brown, Tim Patrick, Isaac Tesla, J-Mo, you also have Khalif Raymond. Like, there's probably one, maybe 2 more spots there, kind of depending on what the Lions do elsewhere. And because this is the last preseason game, cuts are on Tuesday. So we're going to kind of get those answers. Now, obviously, with injuries, that's going to open up more roster spots, but these guys are going to come back. So there's some guys that really needed nice games that didn't necessarily get them. Now, they have had great preseason games and preseason practices overall. If they do get cut, hopefully they make the practice squad. That would be really, really nice. But like a Jackson Meeks, he's been absolutely balling out for the most part. You have Dominic Lovett, who was a draft pick from Brad Holmes. We absolutely understand that Brad Holmes really enjoys his draft pick, so that's going to be an interesting decision to see what happens. You have also running backs. Craig Reynolds is probably going to be there. Is Jacob Saylor's going to be there? Probably not. I can definitely see him being more of a practice kind of guy. You have Sione Vaki that I think will be there. And then another guy that has really been making waves is Grant Studdard. He's been absolutely fantastic at the linebacker spot, but not only the linebacker spot, he's been great on kick return. He's a guy that could be really, really interesting back there. Do I think he's going to be the kick returner for the Lions? Probably not, but he's a really big linebacker that has a ton of speed. In this game, he had a 44-yard kick return. He's just been great when he's been able to hold on to the ball. So I think he's going to be someone that's going to be pretty impactful for the Lions, or at least going to be someone that should hopefully make this roster, because I think he's been good enough. Dan Campbell and Brad Holmes have both kind of talked about it. You really can't take too many quote-unquote project guys, because this team is just so full of talent that there's going to be some hard roster decisions. And I think a couple of years ago, these roster decisions might have been a little bit easier just because of the talent that was there. But there's going to be some guys that are going to be let go that are going to be really good guys. And you're going to have to make the decision between like a Dominic Lovett, between a Jackson Meeks. You're going to also have to make a decision if you want to keep both of those guys. Are you going to cut back on corner? Are you going to cut back on safety? Are you going to cut back on offensive lineman? Like, who's going to be there? And these are obviously decisions that Brad Holmes and Dan Campbell and the coaching staff is going to have to make. We'll find out those decisions. I will probably preview, at least give you my opinion on the roster cuts that do happen. But going off of this last preseason game, there's a couple of guys that I think really solidified their spot. There's a couple of guys that were really close to solidifying it that just didn't show up in this game that Houston just kind of shut down. And then there's a couple of guys that I think really kind of lost the roster spot for the most part. Maybe not like exactly because of this game, but I think Hendon Hooker is one of those guys that will probably be on the outside looking in on this roster cut. And it's going to be interesting to see if another team gives him an opportunity. Maybe they do carry 3 quarterbacks. It doesn't necessarily seem like that's going to be the case for the Lions, but if they do, I think Hendon Hooker is going to absolutely be that third quarterback. Maybe if you let him go, maybe you bring him back on the practice squad. Maybe you try to see a little bit more development there, just because obviously he's a Brad Holmes draft pick, but there has to be a time where you have to just cut things loose, and I think Hendon Hooker just hasn't improved enough, especially when it comes to in the game for preseason performances, because from all the reports, he's been pretty good when it hasn't come to the games. But we all know last year's situation with a backup quarterback, great in the practices, not great in games. And you know what truly matters? The games, the performances that you have in those. And unfortunately, Hendon Hooker has just not done that, and he just didn't do this. And this game, it had one really bad interception and just kind of really showed you the Hendon Hooker that we have seen all preseason long, at least in the games. I haven't been to practices. Maybe he's been better there, but what truly matters in the true test is what happens in the games, and he just hasn't been good outside of really the last drive going into last game, which then you end up throwing a pick six and end up losing. But Lions end up going 1-3 in the preseason. Preseason record doesn't matter. That's obviously a really good thing, because the last time I believe the Lions went undefeated in the preseason, they did not win a single game. So maybe this is something that's good for the Lions, because they didn't play a ton of their starters. Dan Campbell doesn't do that a ton, and he found a couple of guys I think will be really, really good for this Lions team, or at least depth guys that can be able to contribute on special teams, or guys that have really taken control of their own destiny and is going to be able to be a really big piece. And I think one of those guys is obviously Isaac Tesla. And I know I've talked a lot about him, but I think rightfully so. I think he's just been that good, and it's going to be really fun to see how he does in the regular season, because my real question about this draft pick is, what was Arkansas thinking and what was Arkansas doing? Because it makes absolutely no sense what they're doing with him, because if he does anything close to what he's been doing in the preseason and the regular season, this is just another steal from Brad Holmes in the draft. But preseason, like I said, doesn't necessarily matter. It's over. We have cuts on Tuesday. We'll see who the 53-man roster is for the Lions, and we'll see if Zadarius Smith is maybe in a little bit of that conversation as well when it comes time. But yeah, that's really it for the Lions. The last thing I really want to talk about is the Tigers, because the Tigers have been playing a very, very good baseball recently. And don't you love when the Tigers play good? It's just so much more enjoyable to obviously watch them, but so much more enjoyable to talk about them, because when they were going on their losing streak, losing 12 out of the last 13 games during that stretch, it obviously wasn't a ton of fun to talk about. They were getting blown out. They just weren't hitting very well. Pitching wasn't very good. But guess what? It seems like the Tigers are kind of back to themselves a little bit, at least back to themselves of early in the season. They're one of the best teams record-wise in the AL. Like, they're going to be right up there. They just end up sweeping a Houston Astros team that is a very good Houston Astros team. What a series. Offense was great. Pitching was great. And then you also have the Kansas City Royals coming into town. And the Tigers have won 2 out of 3. They have a real opportunity to win their game today to end up sweeping the Royals. And it's just that domination of the Tigers against the AL Central. You look at the Guardians, you look at the Royals. Like, every time they have come to Detroit and they face each other, Detroit has just done everything the right way. And that's just figuring out ways to win, figuring out ways to respond to adversity. And that's exactly what they did in game number 1 against the Kansas City Royals. They went down early, 3-1 against the Royals. And then in the 6th and 7th inning, the Tigers just responded with 2 and 4 runs. It was really all over the lineup. That's the one thing that the Tigers have been really good at when things are going well, is you're getting contributions from guys from 1 through 9. Like, it can be anyone on any given night. We've seen Riley Green contribute. We've seen Andy Ibanez ever since his demotion, or basically being called down. He's been absolutely electric against lefties. That's his calling card, obviously. But, like, ever since he's been called back up, he's just been absolutely dominant. He's been the Andy Ibanez we saw last year. It's just so much fun when he's hitting lefties. He hit a home run in yesterday's game, a huge home run in the bottom of the 8th inning in a game that was 3-2, ended up expanding it to 4-2. But you really look at just some of these guys that are contributing, and it's just so nice having a lineup that maybe you don't have a go-to guy every night, which might be a little bit frustrating. But when things are really going the right way, and when people are hitting, when they're going from first to third, even in yesterday's game, there was a single from Jake Rogers that ended up scoring Zach McKinstry from first base. It's just this aggressive base running that this Tigers team has had, and you really have to give credit to Alex Cora. He's a really aggressive third baseman. He is someone that is going to be sending his guys. Now, it might lead to obviously some of the guys being thrown out at home. But when he's aggressive and when he's right, he really forces the other team to make those decisions. And that's what Kansas City is really struggling with, is they're having to make these decisions, and they almost seem like they're uncomfortable with them. Like, at times it really seems like they're kind of questioning exactly what they're doing. And I think that really puts so much pressure on a Kansas City team that is really kind of starting to fall back. I think you're starting to see a lot of these AL Central teams continue to fall back to the Tigers, just because the Tigers have responded, but also because of these teams are just losing games. And you have the Guardians that I don't think are necessarily the greatest team in the world. They're starting to lose. They're not getting as hot. You have the Kansas City Royals losing this series to the Tigers. The Tigers at least have gained a 1-game lead in front of the Kansas City Royals. Like, this is a really big series, and just this domination that they've had, and that really responds from game 1 to end up coming back and winning game 1, really continue that momentum into game number 2, which game number 2, the Tigers got off to a little bit of a better start. And obviously, like I said earlier, Andy Ibanez had a huge home run. Spencer Torkelson had a home run in this game. You absolutely love to see a torque bomb, basically a torque bomb to left field that had absolutely no chance of staying in the park. You continue to get good performances from starting pitchers. Chris Paddock was actually really good in this game. Now, I know that Chris Castellani really talked about this in his post-game reaction yesterday, but it's pretty true. Is when you talk about Chris Paddock, he's going to be a guy that's going to get you through a couple innings. So once you start to kind of get through the third way through the order, that's when they start kind of teeing off on him. For the most part, he's going to be a guy that probably won't be pitching very much when it comes to playoff baseball, but he's a guy that if he can get you there, I think he's going to be really helpful for that. And then when the playoff baseball comes, you have Tariq Skubal. Jack Flaherty has been a little bit better. You have Casey Mize. Hopefully Casey Mize performs better because he hasn't been necessarily the greatest as of late. But speaking of really great pitchers that have been fantastic ever since the trade deadline, you have Kyle Finnegan. Kyle Finnegan and Will Vest, that 8-9, 7-8 really pitching duo, they just have been absolutely lights out. And Kyle Finnegan is looking some of the best pitching he has had in years. Like, he doesn't look anywhere close to what he was prior to Detroit. I think you really have to give credit to not only the pitching staff, to A.J. Hinch, to Scott Harris. I know I came on here and talked about how the trade deadline was very disappointing, how I wasn't extremely happy about the trade deadline, how I thought that Scott Harris was kind of that quote-unquote smartest man in the room. And I still kind of believe that at that point, but at the same time, these moves that Scott Harris has made has really worked out for the most part. Kyle Finnegan has been absolutely lights out in a bullpen so far. And when you come to a bullpen, especially when you come to October baseball, when you come to playoff baseball, you really need a handful of bullpen guys that you can rely on. And right now they have two guys. You have Melton that can be a long reliever as well. You can almost say you have three guys right there in that bullpen that you can trust as of right now. Now, there's a couple other guys that can get it right. I fully believe that they can get it right. But you're getting closer and closer to a bullpen that when it comes time to a one-series kind of matchup, you can trust. Now, long-term, if it was like a 7-game series, do I think you can necessarily trust them every single night and pitch them every single night? Absolutely not. You can't pitch a bullpen every single night the same guy because Will Vest pitched the last 2 games, probably won't pitch today in the games against Kansas City, but having guys like Will Vest, having guys like Kyle Finnegan, having guys like Melton that you can trust in that bullpen is really going to go a long way. And it really depends on what these starters do. If they can get good outings like 5, 6, 7 innings from time to time, Tariq Skubal is going to do absolutely everything he can to continue to pitch the way he has been. And he hasn't even been the greatest according to his standard. But if you really have these guys like a Chris Paddock, if you have these guys like Jack Flaherty, if you have these guys like Casey Mize continuing to pitch decent innings and giving the ball to the bullpen, getting to guys like Kyle Finnegan, Will Vest, Melton, they're going to win a ton of games. And they're going to win with that gritty Tigers mentality. And that's exactly what they have been doing these last couple of series. Hopefully they can continue that in today's game against the Kansas City Royals, and then after that you start a series against the A's and then the Royals again. There's a real possibility that if this Tigers team continues to perform well, they can continue to lead and continue to extend this division, which is absolutely the goal. It's a division that if you look at every other division is, I believe, the widest margin when it comes to the first and second team. It's a wide division lead. I know there's a lot of panic a few weeks ago, but it truly seems like this Tigers team is back to the way of old, and I think that's the really exciting part, is they're getting contributions, and it really starts with that 1 through 9, really starts with a guy like Tariq Skubal, really starts with the bullpen that really complements each other really well, and it really starts with Chris Fetter, A.J. Hinch, to getting these guys in the right spots, getting these guys ready for every single game. And this is a really fun, gritty team. And this is a team that you can see making a run in October, a team that they continue to play well. Hopefully it doesn't necessarily get too hot too early, because I don't necessarily love that. I think you really want to try to be playing your best baseball in October. I think they can get better. The talent at the top maybe not be as good as the top teams in the MLB, but sure is that gritty Tigers that I think a lot of fans love, and I think a lot of people are back into this team. When a few weeks ago there was real questions about, is this team going to be able to even win the division? Right now, I think you can confidently say yes. Obviously, there's some really big matchups coming in the future. They need to continue to win series, especially in the AL Central. But what they have been doing so far is just absolutely dominating the Central. If they can get a series sweep against the Royals, if they can go into the A's series with more confidence, I think that will really help continue to obviously expand the division. But then you can start really talking about, like, what is this team going to look like? Hopefully, so avoid the wild card. They have enough games ahead where if they don't go on another really big slide, they should be okay. But I love talking about the great Tigers. I love talking about the Lions as well. Obviously, like I said earlier, Lions have cuts on Tuesday. No one loves cuts. Obviously, these guys are losing their jobs. Difficult day for a lot of those guys. Lots of fun, exciting things coming up, though, besides that. So if any of those players are listening that get cut, I fully apologize. Like, it sucks. Like, I understand that you're losing your job. It's a part of the business. I'm sure that they realize that as well. Sucks to see, but overall, just something that really has to happen. But yeah, hopefully you enjoyed this episode. It was a lot of fun talking and very positive things for the most part. And then, yeah, this is, like I said, the introduction. This is the last episode before college football. This is where the season just starts. And I have a lot of very exciting things planned. I'm going to start previewing like a lot of these football games. I think I have quite a few going into this week, so absolutely stay tuned into that, especially when it comes to YouTube. A lot of those will be solely on YouTube. But I got Michigan State, Michigan next episode to talk about Michigan State playing Western, obviously Michigan playing New Mexico, and then more college football going towards that. So if you love college football, definitely continue to tune in. If you like Tigers, likes Lions, I will definitely still talk about those teams as well. But yeah, that is a wrap to episode number 479. Thank you for tuning into this episode, and tune in to the next one.